Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Hard-Won Islamic Study Circle, HISC Seerah session 232, and just a continuation of recaps of the previous study circles. The last one we did a couple of weeks ago was around sessions 39 to 42, where we talked about the migration of the Muslims to Abyssinia, and the conversation between Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and the Najashi, and how Amr ibn al-As was sent to try and get them back. And then that continued into the next session, Najashi's conversion to Islam and his protection of the Muslims in Abyssinia, and the unsuccessful attempt from Amr ibn al-As and his companion to extradite the refugees that were in Abyssinia. Then session 41 was a recap of the conversion of Hamza ibn Abi Talib. And Hamza, obviously, he was protecting the honor of his tribe, Banu Hashim, when people were criticizing the Prophet ﷺ. And then out of anger, he said that he had also become a Muslim. And then later on, he converted with all sincerity. And then session 42 was the really pivotal event in Islam, which was the conversion of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And Umar was on his way to collect a bounty on the death of the Prophet ﷺ when he encountered somebody. He said, look, someone in your household has become a Muslim. And then he went there, and then he eventually was redirected to the Prophet ﷺ and became a Muslim. And we talked about how they marched, did a demonstration through the streets of Makkah, ended up in the Kaaba and prayed publicly. So session 43 recap is essentially the backlash that the Quraish had against the high-profile conversions, and then the seemingly sort of snowballing effect that could cause. But prior to that, we talked briefly about there was a champion wrestler by the name of Ruqana, and he was essentially the undisputed wrestling champion of Arabia. And then he heard about the Prophet ﷺ and the so-called issues that he was causing in society. So he challenged the Prophet ﷺ to a wrestling match in order to publicly humiliate the Prophet ﷺ, because he was the best there was. However, with the Prophet ﷺ, not known to be a wrestler, was given power by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to overpower Ruqana on 3 successive occasions, and thereafter Ruqana converted to Islam, acknowledging the truth of revelation and the fact that the Prophet ﷺ was indeed a prophet of Allah, because there was no other way. He felt that, because he was the best at what he did, he could have been defeated by a normal person without Allah's backing. Then we also talked about, because there was a wager on this particular wrestling match, but we also talked about the famous wager or bet between Abu Bakr and the Quraish, which was referenced in the Qur'an, the fact that the Persian Empire would be defeated by the Romans, and then Abu Bakr, he bet a large amount on that prophecy being fulfilled. And again, just technically, whilst it was betting on the wrestling match and it was betting on this particular occasion, it's an acknowledgement that actually the rules of betting weren't canonized until Medina, which was obviously when the Prophet ﷺ had established the state. Then also we talked, as I say, moving on to the fact that the Quraysh were panicking because of these high-profile conversions, Hamza and Umar, and a public demonstration of the strength of the Muslims, despite the fact that 100 had already gone to Abyssinia. There's maybe 40, 50 left max in Makkah at the time. And so in desperation, they dispatched a seasoned negotiator, Utba ibn Rabiya, gave him full authority, delegated authority, to negotiate on the behalf of the Quraysh any compatible deals that would see the Prophet stop preaching as he was, to try and hold his spread. So Utbah, he went and he reiterated the previous offers to the Prophet ﷺ of making him king, giving him unlimited wealth, allowing him to marry any of the women he likes, and or be treated by the best doctors of the time for any illness that he may have. And the Prophet ﷺ, obviously rejected all of those. And as part of his sort of rejection, he started reciting verses from Surah Taha. And these verses, they talked about the destruction of the previous people, Ad and Thamud. And then as the Prophet was reciting the Qur'an, Utbah, he sits up and he puts his fingers on the Prophet's lips and says, "Stop, don't recite anymore," because of fear that the Prophet would then call upon Allah to punish and destroy them as a people, and the Quraish. And so Utbah then went back to the Quraish, and the Quraish sitting in their Nadwa, they could see that Utbah, his face had changed. And we've talked before how the Arabs were good at reading faces, as it were. So they could see how his face had changed, and then he came back and basically said, "Let the Prophet ﷺ preach, do what he wants to do. If he is successful, then you as a people will have one of your own people controlling the Arabs and the non-Arabs." So he was recognizing the expansionist vision of the Prophet ﷺ. However, if the other Arabs deal with him, then you've washed your hands of them. Let the other Arabs deal with him if they want. So basically saying it's a win-win. So let him do what he wants, and then you will gain mastery over the people. If the other people deal with him, then that's your problem solved. However, the Quraysh, they rejected his advice. Then we talked in session 44 about the sort of some more final negotiations. Again, just recapping of the offers of kingship, which is a new concept to the Arab. They didn't believe in a king. They had tribal elders, and they had a council of elders. So giving him absolute authority, wealth, marriage, etc. And previously they'd asked for him to produce mountains of gold, raise a ladder to the heavens, asked him to resurrect Qusay ibn Kilab, and they could ask him that, if this is true. So we talked about all of these negotiation tactics that they had, and obviously compared those things where the Prophet was very uncompromising about the message of Islam. And we compared that to politicians today in the West and even in Muslim countries who would give up all of Islam for the slightest benefit. And again, here you've got the uncompromising nature of the Prophet as opposed to modern day Muslims who, for the sake of power, would sell up all of their beliefs and compromise virtually everything. Anyway, because of the frustration of the Quraysh in these matters, Abu Jahal, he publicly announced that he wanted to kill the Prophet ﷺ. And then he would do that by dropping a heavy stone on the head of the Prophet ﷺ whilst he was prostrating in the Kaaba. And this proclamation wasn't challenged by anyone in their court, in the Dar al-Nadwa, or in the wider society. And this demonstrated a shift in public opinion, whereby they would actually acquiesce to something which was so heinous, this crime, to kill one of their own and to kill a noble person of their own, that, this contradicted their very values and sense of justice as Arabs. So this, was a demonstration of the seismic shift in public opinion that was generated by the elite against the Prophet ﷺ, whereby somebody could publicly announce he's going to kill the Prophet ﷺ with impunity. Previously, people would have objected, but not anymore. And that's not just because of the authority of Abu Jahl. This is just a general acceptance there. Nevertheless, on this particular occasion, which probably happened after the death of Abu Talib, On this occasion, Prophet was protected by angels. Abu Jahl was carrying out his threat to drop a stone, and the Prophet was protected by angels. Some narrations say he was made invisible. Some say that there was an angry braying camel that scared Abu Jahal. And we've talked previously about some of the other negotiation attempts, sending a delegation to Yathrib to seek counsel of the Jewish elders, and also a last-ditch high-level delegation from the Quraish, offering this, well-known compromise whereby they would worship each other's gods for a month and then set up an evaluation task force to assess which was better. And the Prophet obviously rejected that, and then so the Quraysh came down from, worshipping, gods a month each. They said, basically, we'll worship, our gods for a week and yours for a month. And then they said, and that was rejected. And they said, we'll worship our gods for a day and yours for a month. And then we'll have this evaluation task force. And again, that was soundly rejected. And so this sort of reciprocal worship, this compromise process, did not countenance any of that. And so, it seemed that the Quraysh had exhausted a lot of their options, and they had to find alternative tactics in order to solve the situation of the Muslims and the Prophet. So, session 45, we talked about the next level, and this was a completely new and previously unheard of method that the Quraysh had employed, and this is the process of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS. And obviously, we know a bit about it in the modern context with regards to Palestine and the state of Israel. So, in this session 45, we discussed some of the self-proclaimed core values of modern Western society, which include democracy, equality, freedom of speech, and then we say how we highlighted how the hypocrisy of Western nations when they actually go against their core values, these red lines, yet still preach to others about the values that they pertain to have. For example, we talked about how the United Nations was set up, but the anti-democratic feature of having some countries with a veto power. That's completely undemocratic, yet they still claim that this is a bastion of democracy through the UN. Western countries they support, and we all know this, tyrannical dictators, whilst saying that they want to spread democracy. We've talked about the rise of racism, Islamophobia, and privilege amongst the ruling elite. Again, goes against their so-called values of equality or equity in society. And again, looking at how they trumpet this idea of so-called freedom of speech, but how that becomes selective in certain cases because you're not allowed to criticize some things, but it's okay to criticize the Muslims and have Islamophobia, and nobody bats an eyelid. So again, the hypocrisy of society now, and comparing that to the hypocrisy that the Quraysh had by claiming to be a society whose core values are generosity, tribal allegiances, and protecting your own tribe at all costs. Yet despite that, they then institute this BDS, this boycott, divestment and sanctions approach, which had never been heard of, never been done before like this on this scale. So they said that nobody was to buy, sell, interact, marry with anyone from Banu Hashim. And again, before they got to that, they dispatched to Abu Talib these demands that he hands over the Prophet and the Quraysh will then, and it was quite clear, they said they will then execute the Prophet but they themselves wouldn't execute the Prophet, they would delegate it to another tribe so that the other tribe would be the ones that carried out the execution process, and then the Quraysh would then pay blood money on behalf of the other tribe to Banu Hashim. And if Banu Hashim, if Abu Talib did not agree to these conditions, they would depose Abu Talib as head of the tribe. Again, completely unheard of. Obviously, Abu Talib, he disagreed, and so they instituted their boycott against the Muslims. And then Abu Talib, he said, he would rather live in his own valley than to be boycotted amongst the people in Makkah. So he took Banu Hashim, the Muslims, and all the non-Muslims alike, took them to the valley that they owned outside of Makkah. For 2 or 3 years, they lived there. And we talked about how difficult this self-imposed exile was for Banu Hashim, because as a tribe, they were collectively starved. They were eating grass. They were eating leaves of the bushes. They were the Muslims and the non-Muslims, Banu Hashim, were in a terrible state. And this severely tarnished the international reputation of Makkah and the Quraysh. There were a few Muslims there were a few non-Muslims or some secret Muslims in Makkah who would sometimes laden a camel with food and then go to the top of the valley and then shoo the camel to go into the valley, so Banu Hashim could basically live off that one camel and the food and the provisions for a month or two. So this BDS, this boycott agreement, was written down on a parchment, and that parchment was put in a leather pouch, and that was hung inside the Kaaba. And the Kaaba doors were locked. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he made a dua against the people of Makkah that they would then suffer a similar fate to them, and they underwent their own famine, so much so that the actual Quraysh had the gall to send a delegation to Abu Talib and ask for a reversal of that dua of the Prophet ﷺ. Then later on, we talked about how that boycott was essentially cancelled, and it was essentially down to, according to the books of Seerah, one individual called Hisham, who concocted a plot to cancel the agreement. So he went around recruiting fellow non-Muslim sympathizers from amongst the Quraysh nobility to publicly cancel this shameful boycott agreement in a public gathering of council elders. So he found one person who said, what can we two do? We're only two. Find someone else. He found a third. And they said, what can us three do? Find a fourth. And found a fifth person. And so they then agreed to stand up in a gathering and say, well, we never agreed to any of this. And so once public opinion had shifted against the agreement, they summoned Abu Talib from the valley to renegotiate a deal. And Abu Talib, he then asked the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah had informed him that that document had been eaten up by ants, therefore the agreement was cancelled or voided. So Abu Talib, had full conviction in what the Prophet ﷺ said. So he went to the Quraysh as part of the negotiation and said that the document is invalid, it's been eaten up by ants because his nephew had told him. And if that is not the case, I will hand over the Prophet ﷺ to you and you can do whatever you like with him. When they went into the Kaaba, opened up the leather pouch, it had been eaten by termites, except for the start of the document, which said Bismillah. And so the document was then voided. The Banu Hashim then reintegrated into Makkah, and as part of the reconciliation, they agreed not to bring up the issue of the boycott. There will be no finger pointing due to this really painful instance. Session 46, we talked about the death of Abu Talib. So getting on to that, The boycott, as we had mentioned, had caused considerable reputational damage to the Quraysh because they were seen by all the other tribes to be punishing their own relatives, their own tribespeople, their own kin. And so pilgrims and the other Arabian tribes started to distrust the Quraysh following this episode. How can we trust them to look after the Kaaba and look after us if this is how they treat their own kin? So again, it was a public relations disaster for the Quraysh, and again, the law of unintended consequences. But obviously, Allah is the best planner. And we talked briefly about how a condition of reconciliation was not to talk about the boycott and not to apportion blame on anyone and any individual. So now, having come back from the valley and through these years of starvation, Abu Talib, who was old, became even more frail. And it wasn't soon after returning that he essentially entered the last phases of his life. And so the Quraysh could see that he is going to pass away shortly. He's very frail. So the Quraysh sent another delegation dispatched to put pressure on Abu Talib to get, before he dies, to get him to stop the Prophet so-called ridiculing their idols. But when summoned to Abu Talib, the Prophet said that he was willing to accept what the Quraysh wanted if they were to collectively agree on one condition from his side. And the Quraysh got really happy. We'll give you 10 conditions. And that one condition from the Prophet side was to say La ilaha illallah. And obviously the Quraysh then, got really disappointed and angry at that. The Prophet said, look, if you say this one thing, you will be given dominion over the whole of Arabia. But the Quraysh refused. And again, this goes back to what Utba ibn Rabiya also said. So Abu Talib is slowly dying, and the Prophet is aware of this. So he visited him as he's on his deathbed. And obviously the process of dying there, it takes a week or two or slightly longer. So the Prophet visited him and implored him to, implored his uncle, his dear uncle, to testify in Allah. And it said that he was about to, take the Shahada, but he was shamed by Abu Jahal for wanting to abandon the religion of his father. So on the one side of the bed, you've got the Prophet saying, become a Muslim, and I'll see what I can do on the Day of Judgment. And then he's about to become a Muslim. And then Abu Jahl says, how dare you abandon the religion of your father, Abdul Muttalib? And so then Abu Talib, he didn't say it there. And he's later reported to have said before dying that Abu Talib admitted that he wanted to say the kalima purely to please the Prophet ﷺ, because he dearly loved the Prophet ﷺ more than his own sons. So he wanted to say the kalima just to please the Prophet ﷺ, but interestingly, he was afraid of his legacy and what the people would say, and the people would then accuse him of reneging on his religion and the religion of his forefathers. So purely because of what the people would say against him, that he was afraid to die, therefore he became a Muslim. He decided not to do the Shahada. And obviously the Prophet went away, and then within a short period, Abu Talib died, and it said that his last words were, "I die on the religion of my father." So upon his death, when he died, Ali went to the Prophet and says, your so-and-so uncle has passed away. What do you want me to do? And then the Prophet ordered Ali to assist in the burial of your own father. And he goes, well, he's a mushrik, but he's still your father, and give him his rights. And later on, I think it was Abbas who asked the Prophet, did your relationship with Abu Talib avail him of? What was the point of it all? if he's going to go into hellfire. And the Prophet said that because of his intercession, he hopes that Abu Talib will be one of the least punished people in Jahannam, in the fire. That his ankles would be, he would be standing in fire up to his ankles, and that his brain would boil because of that. And that's one of the least punishments in the hellfire. And that was due to the intercession process and because of how Abu Talib looked after him. And this was after the Qur'an forbade the Muslims for asking Allah to forgive the polytheists. So, people were going to make dua for polytheists and the mushrikeen, and Allah said, look, this is not befitting of the Muslims to ask Allah for this. And we also talked about how there is some wisdom in him not converting, in as far as if Abu Talib had become a Muslim at any time prior, then, as we have seen, he would have been deposed as leader of Banu Hashim, and they would have brought in another leader who would not protect the Prophet ﷺ. And the fact that he protected the Prophet ﷺ to the very end, it was because he was a non-Muslim, and so the other Quraysh would accept that protection. And then we also talked about how deathbed conversions may or may not be accepted by Allah, and so and talked about the story of the Pharaoh. So it's important to surround ourselves with goodly, pious friends, because there you've got Abu Jahl on his deathbed surrounded by friends who didn't have his best interests at heart. So if we want a good ending, we need to have good friends around us. And another lesson is Islam requires actions and not simply belief. And so, even if Abu Talib had just muttered something, it may not have been enough, because he needs to demonstrate that through his actions. And then finally, the last session, we talked about the other body blow to the Prophet's morale at the time. And this is the death of his beloved wife, Khadija. But before we get on to that, once Abu Talib had died, he was the leader of Banu Hashim. So the leadership of Banu Hashim then fell to the next eligible brother in the line, the sons of Abdul Muttalib. And from Abu Talib, that went to Abu Lahab. So Abu Lahab was now leader of Banu Hashim. And despite being such a prominent enemy of the Prophet ﷺ, right from the outset, and we talked about how Abu Lahab was against the Prophet ﷺ from the very beginning, and obviously there is a whole surah that references Abu Lahab and the fire that he and his wife is awaiting them. Abu Lahab became the leader of Banu Hashim, and initially he recognized his tribal duty was to protect the Prophet ﷺ, because this is the authority of the tribe. Right? So it was important for him to establish his authority. So initially, Abu Lahab, he allowed the Prophet to do what he did in the days of Abu Talib. So he gave him the same level of protection as Abu Talib did, and he made that announcement. But then Abu Jahal, he was very, very frustrated by this, thinking, how could you? We thought that once you'd get in charge, it'd be fair game against the Prophet. So Abu Jahl, he went to Abu Lahab and says, look, you've got to do something. And Abu Jahl says, look, I can't. I'm the head of the tribe now. I need to, be a politician and respect that. So then Abu Jahl, he cunningly said, well, why don't you ask the Prophet what is the fate of his father, Abdul Muttalib? So then Abu Lahab, he went and asked the Prophet, what is the fate of my father? And the Prophet said, your father is with his people. And so Abu Lahab, he went back thinking, oh, that's fine. My father in the afterlife, he is with his people. And then when he told that to Abu Lahab laughed in his face and ridiculed him, said, how foolish you are, because he says his people will be in the hellfire. So Abu Lahab was so wound up by that, he was forced to withdraw his protection of the Prophet ﷺ. from Banu Hashim, because he felt so slighted by the Prophet's double talk, as it were. So thereafter, we see there was an increase in personal and physical attacks upon the Prophet because he no longer enjoyed the protection of the tribal elders, Abu Talib and now Abu Jahal. And this is where those incidents probably happened, in terms of when Abu Jahal said he's going to throw something on the head of the Prophet and crush his head. This is probably where he took the intestines of the camel and dumped it on the Prophet. This is probably that period of time where people would dump things on the Prophet as he's doing sajda or in his garden, because he had no protection now. So it was fair game. So it's probably happened in these weeks. So within a few weeks, maybe a couple of weeks or a month of Abu Talib passing away, Khadija, radiallahu anha, she also passed away. And obviously this led to further immense grief in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And so we discussed before about the Prophet's marriage, and then in this session we talked about some of the biography of Khadija bint Khuwaylid, the fact that she was born into a wealthy, influential, noble family. Her and the Prophet they go back in their lineage to Qusay bin Kilab, and Khadija, she first married somebody called Abu Hala. Then it said that she may have had some children. Then she divorced Abu Hala, and then she married Atiq ibn Ayyad, who was a really wealthy nobleman who died and left all his wealth to Khadija because they had no children. So she became fabulously wealthy, and then she had this business. So she was a single lady who ran a successful business, buying and selling, etc. And then it was through this, we talked about how her sister Hala had heard about the honesty of the Prophet ﷺ, and then orchestrated, the fact that the Prophet ﷺ would go on a business trip on behalf of Khadija to Syria. They made lots of money, and then the marriage proposal came. And we talked about some of the children of the Prophet ﷺ through Khadija, Qasim, who died in infancy, and obviously that's when the Prophet ﷺ got his kunya, Abu Qasim. So there was Qasim, there was Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, Fatima, and then Abdullah. And the cousins of Khadija bint Khuwaylid, they included Waraka ibn Nawfal and Uthman ibn al-Huwayrith. And these were two of those four Hunafa who concocted an agreement not to become polytheists and decide their own way of worshipping Islam, or worship the Prophet and the religion of Ibrahim. Khadija was also given the glad tidings of a palace in Jannah made of exquisite pearl that would be free from tiredness and from stress. And this news came via Jibreel from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Khadija, she ranks amongst the four greatest women ever: Maryam, Khadija, Fatima, and Asiya. Two of the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija's daughters were divorced by the sons of Abu Jahal. So this was Ruqayya and Kulthum. So Ruqayya would then marry Uthman ibn Affan, but died during the time of the Battle of Badr. And then later Kulthum was married off by the Prophet ﷺ again to Uthman, and then she later died before the Prophet ﷺ passed away. And we talked about how one of the other daughters, Zainab, she was married to Abu al-As, and we'll talk about that later on. Abu al-As was captured at the Battle of Badr, or he basically gave himself up, and then he was ransomed in exchange for a necklace from Khadija that was given, and the Prophet said that, bring back my daughter Zainab, and then your ransom will be done. And this was during Medina, obviously. And then we also finished off by saying how the Prophet loved Khadija dearly, that even after her death, he would send gifts to the family and friends of Khadija. And this caused this love of the Prophet for Khadija, even after her death, caused intense jealousy amongst some of his wives. And we mentioned some of those stories later on. So that's what we did last time. Inshallah, next time we'll do the story of Taif and the process of going to Taif, do a summary of the Meccan Seerah, and then we'll start one of the greatest gifts that Allah gave to the Prophet, which was the Isra wal Miraj. And I think we did about 7-8 sessions on that. So inshallah, until next time, do remember us in your du'as. Assalamu alaikum. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير.